And a good Wednesday to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. It is finally the light at the end of the tunnel we have been referring to. We have a couple days without rain chances in the forecast. So anything you have in the way of outdoor plans, number one, I would recommend making some outdoor plans over the course of the next couple of days. But number two, you are not going to have to duck and dodge maybe a isolated shower or a thunderstorm or maybe something in the way of some more widespread rain, which we did see over the course of this past weekend. So let's go ahead and talk about everything that you need to know. First things first, we'll circle back to yesterday because it was another afternoon where we had some pop-up showers and some thunderstorms. And the only thunderstorm that really kind of packed a punch was actually going to be over here to the west of us here, to the west of Taylor County into Talbot and getting into Marion counties over here. And that's where we see this isolated patch of some green, indicating some higher rainfall totals. But it didn't even pop up a severe thunderstorm warning. In fact, it was just a special weather statement. Central Georgia as a whole, most areas probably dodged the rain, but if you did have anything recorded, it was going to be maybe around a trace or about a tenth of an inch in nature. So let's take a look at some of these isolated pockets where you do see some darker blue, maybe in portions of Taylor County right here, eastern Crawford County, right to the east of Fort Valley and Peach County. Some totals right there around an inch in nature, 2 inches for a total over there right on the county line of Marion and Talbot counties, just to the south of Talbotton. And then if you do find yourself in this very, very, very faint blue shade, that's actually going to be somewhere around 0.0 inches of rain or maybe 0.0 or 0.1 inches of rain like we do spot in Montezuma. Same story over here in western Warner Robins, closer to the I-75 corridor. Only recording simply just about a trace of rain or maybe only a couple hundredths of an inch of rain. We go over to east central Georgia and we can see some patchy areas of some darker blue shades, maybe even a patch of some green right here over in western Emmanuel County, 1.8 inches of rain. 1 inch of rain just right here on the Lawrence and Johnson County line. Same story up here to the northeast of Wrightsville, just south of the Washington County line, around an inch of rain. And a couple isolated pockets that are in the upper range of maybe about 3/4 of an inch of rain or 1 inch of rain, pretty close to Tynnell and getting down to the south of Sandersville in the southern portion of Washington County. But again, most of these totals that you see are going to be around a tenth of an inch of rain or maybe just a couple hundredths of an inch of rain. Nothing very substantial, and I imagine that data is not going to necessarily really play a role in our drought monitor update. In fact, it's actually not going to even be taken into account with this week's update of the drought monitor. It will be taken into account for next week's. So lower humidity for the next couple of days, and that is the main dictator of your forecast. That's what's going to influence this dry stretch that we do have over the course of the next couple of days. But also a big headline, you probably noticed it when you walked out the door this morning. It definitely wasn't chilly by any means, but it was a little cooler and noticeably cooler than what we have seen as of recent days. So those cool mornings are looking to continue, but the afternoons are going to be pleasantly warm. And what I mean by pleasantly warm is we're not going to have that soupy and that swampy air present that is going to lead to maybe the feels like temperature being a couple degrees above what the actual temperature reads. It is looking like the numbers are going to be below average, and they're going to feel like below average numbers. Rain is returning as we go into the end of the weekend. At least the rain chances are going to return. There's still a bit of iffiness regarding the second half of your 7-day forecast, but we'll go over what you should expect. Here's a walk around the quad, starting to see a lot of that upper level cloud cover we had a better image of early this morning continue to push out over into the distance. So right now it's mainly over to the west and the southwest of us here in central Georgia, downtown Macon and downtown Dublin. Barely an image of any of that cloud cover. It's just a story of some blue skies, which is also mainly the story down there in Houston County and Warner Robins and by the Georgia National Fairgrounds. As you look over here to the west by the fairgrounds, that's where we're starting to see the flags waving, blowing away from our camera. And again, we are pointing at the big dub right here, so that means that if the winds are blowing the flags away from the camera, they are blowing or coming in from the east or easterly direction, and they will continue that direction as we go throughout the rest of today, maybe a bit of a northeasterly component as well. So your temperatures across much of the United States, they've gotten a bit of a downtick compared to what this graphic has looked like over the last couple of days, mainly in the 70s all across the eastern United States, but 63 over in Amarillo, 66 up in Denver, a bit of the outliers in the bottom end of your temperature range. And still a couple areas that are holding on to the heat and the humidity. 80 in Orlando, 82 in New Orleans, 80 over in Houston, and then an 84 all the way down in Laredo. That's going to be the warmest number that we can spot. In these areas that are holding on to the 80s, they're not necessarily feeling that cooler and drier air that our backdoor frontal boundary has issued or ushered into much of the southeast United States. 70 in Athens, 70 up in Atlanta, 73 here in Macon, and those numbers are going to be pretty popular all across Alabama, up into South Carolina, and a little bit warmer back over into Mississippi. Starkville and Meridian hovering in the mid-70s, 78 in Mobile, 78 in Pensacola. Same story down there in Jacksonville for the warmest number that we spot in our little corner of the country. Now here's a look at your temperatures in central Georgia specifically. Low 70s and a few areas that are creeping into the mid-70s. 74 in Eatonton and Sparta, 76 at the warmest all the way down there in Telfair County and McRae, and a couple areas that are just close to the 70-degree mark in general, 70 popping up in Cochran. But we are getting rid of that cooler feeling that we did have this morning. We saw some numbers get down as low as 56 degrees this morning, and they're actually looking to get a little bit lower as we start out tomorrow. So we'll talk more about that coming up in a moment. Maintaining our widespread light breeze, so anywhere from maybe a 9-mile-per-hour breeze up to somewhere around 16 or 17 miles per hour as far as your winds go. And the occasional gusts, of course, are popping up to 18, maybe even 20 miles per hour across a select few locations. So the breeze is going to be noticeable, but I imagine it is feeling very pleasant as your numbers are now crawling into the 70s and we have little to no moisture present, which you do see here on your humidities level graphic. This is definitely going to be uncharacteristic for the month of June, but it is going to be a bit of a taste of when we started to feel some of those warmer temperatures in the springtime months. And that's where we did have a lot of drier air present. And like I said, it's just not going to have kind of that sticky, that swampy feeling that the air that you can wear does typically have, and that's what we had present over previous days. And we do see all of that air that you can wear back over to the west into western Alabama, eastern Mississippi, and especially swampy stuff that's going to be closer to the Mississippi River Basin over there in western Mississippi and getting into kind of eastern Louisiana. So here's a look at the dew point temperatures themselves. As you can see, low and mid 40s over to the east, and it is maybe slightly more humid back over to the west, but we're barely talking about any shades of that light green whatsoever. You can see some faint areas of it back in the western portion of the state. But again, your winds are filtering in from the east and the northeast, so that's where the drier and the cooler air is funneling into first and foremost. So we are going to watch some of these dew point temperatures in the mid 40s continue to push back over to the west, and also just a very, very dry environment. There's nothing to work with in the way of moisture, and that's all courtesy of the drier air mass and the surface high pressure that we do have filtering in behind yesterday's backdoor front. Here's a look at your satellite imagery, and now all the cloud cover that we did see this morning, it is down to the south and the southwest of us. You might be right on the edge of that cloud deck if you're down by the Lake Blackshear area in Criss County. Elsewhere in central Georgia, it is just crystal clear, and most of the state is entirely crystal clear. So a lot of these upper level clouds are going to continue to recede back down to the south. And it's of the upper level cloud cover nature. It's not even doing a good job of blocking your sunshine in all honesty, but it will be a forecast that is dominated by sunshine not only for the rest of today, but throughout the rest of the work week across many areas in the southeast United States. So 85 for a high temperature yesterday compared to 89, which is your average high temperature this time of year. Falling short of that number for yet another day, 65 as we started out the morning. Exactly where we should be for your average low temperature in the mid 60s. So definitely not flirting with the record of 46 set back in 1972, and very thankfully not flirting with this triple digit heat that we did see back in 1985. 103 degrees, the record high temperature, and we have been talking about it. The record high temperature for the month of June sits at 108 degrees all time. That's throughout any day of the month of June. And very thankfully, we've barely crept into the 90s so far, so we definitely don't want to see the warm up near triple digit heat, especially when we are very likely going to pair up those warmer temperatures with a very humid atmosphere. But that's not the case today, and it will not be the case over the course of the next few days. So your departure of rain, it continues to go down, but overall, we'll take that trade-off. We're willing to sacrifice maybe a bit of a dip down farther into that negative category if it does mean we don't have to duck and dodge some showers or some storms for the sake of some of those afternoon plans. Sunrise yesterday, 6:27, and 8:38 is when the sunset was, creeping closer and closer to that time frame where we are going to get into our earliest sunrise time and then, of course, our latest sunset time, which we still have about give or take 10 minutes to go in terms of that latest sunset time as we go into the back half of June. So let's circle back to the month of May. I've shown this graphic a lot over the last couple of days and really just trying to get it out to let you know that May was uncharacteristically cool here in central Georgia. We did have a stretch of about 7 days in a row from the 16th to the 22nd where we had just slightly above average numbers. These numbers were not too much above average, but they were in the upper 80s and low 90s. And when you paired it up with some humidity, those numbers did feel a little bit warmer. So that was really our most substantial warm stretch of weather that we did have as of recently. Then we kind of hit that stretch of those pop-up rain chances, which didn't result in too much of a downtick in terms of your high temperatures. Still in the upper half of the 80s until we got to Sunday, where we had that widespread cloud cover courtesy of the wedge that kept the numbers way below average. But 20 days out of 31 days for the month of May, nearly 2/3 of the month of May was below average for your afternoon high temperatures. And so far, we're kicking off the month of June on the exact same note. 87 and 85 recorded for your high temperatures the last 2 days. Again, not too far off that average number of 89 degrees this time of year, but it is just continuing that stretch of some blue boxes that we will see for the beginning of meteorological summer, which did get kick-started as of yesterday. June 1st did mark the beginning of that meteorological summer time frame, and it looks like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way into the beginning of the weekend are going to continue this stretch of some blue boxes, and you can see that's getting kick-started today, where your hour-by-hour warm-up only goes into the upper 70s and near 80 degrees as we round out the afternoon. 80 degrees is what I went with for a high temperature today, but I really wanted to emphasize the fact that whether we hit 80 degrees or maybe we top out at 79 degrees, we're really going to be in the neighborhood of 10 degrees below average for this time of year. So some substantially cooler air is beginning to funnel in. Although 79 and 80, that's still going to be a very pleasantly warm afternoon. It is going to be dry later on today, nothing but sunshine like the current scene that we did see around the quad, and some breezy conditions once again out of the northeast will continue to linger into the afternoon. 5 to 10 miles per hour, seeing some sustained winds already up to 15 miles per hour, and then the occasional gust that could get around 20 to maybe even 22, 23 miles per hour later on this afternoon. So it's going to be an absolutely incredible day for the sake of anything you have in the way of some outdoor plans, and it's all courtesy of this guy up here, centered in upstate Virginia, getting over into eastern West Virginia. Eastern West Virginia, that's a bit of a contradictory statement right there, but nonetheless, high pressure is continuing to dry out this entire eastern half of the United States, and it's all resulting in that flow coming down via the Appalachian Mountains. So it's a bit of a setup that looks like a wedge, but in fact, it's just really going to be the surface high pressure up here that's drying our atmosphere out, and that flow is continuing to push in that much drier air mass down here in the southeast United States. And then you can see where the boundary does sit right to the south of it, right to the south of Orlando. That's where we spot some pretty widespread showers that are going to be present in the southern portion of the Florida Peninsula. And then along where the boundary is kind of stalled out here in the northern Gulf, that's where we're seeing some pop-up showers beginning to develop along where that boundary does sit. And we're not going to really look at that boundary having any implications to our forecast. I think if it does do anything, it might continue to sag down into the Gulf just a little bit more, and we might see some form of a low pressure center develop. And that moisture associated with the low pressure center, it could surge up into kind of the northern Gulf into states like Mississippi and Alabama over the next couple of days. But we'll talk more about that once we get into your long-range models. Let's spend a very brief moment talking about Future View. I put 3 pause points on here on Future View just to show you over the course of really the next 24 hours, maybe even about 30 hours in time, we're not going to see really anything in the way of cloud cover. Once we get to Friday, okay, yeah, maybe a few upper level clouds try to pass through. That's it. That's all I have to note with Future View. There's going to be a very quiet stretch of weather. Like I said, that drier air mass associated with that surface high pressure up to the northeast, it continues to dominate our forecast. But eventually, all good things must come to an end, and we will start to receive some more southerly flow, and we'll start to filter some more moisture back into the forecast to create some pop-up rain chances and at least increased cloud cover as we go into the beginning of the weekend. But here's a look at your humidity day by day, hovering in the comfortable range, maybe even a little bit lower than that, with dew point temperatures in the 40s and the 50s. Typically, we don't see these frontal boundaries kind of come through during the summertime months. And if we do, it's not going to result in too substantial of a drop in the moisture content. We might start to get into the very light green shade of things, but overall, we are going to hang around with dew point temperatures in the 60s and the 70s over the next couple of months. So we will soak up this stretch of some very dry air while it does last. But then by the time we creep into the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, looks like a little bit of moisture is filtering back in. I think before it's all said and done, we'll see Sunday's plot point a little bit higher than what we do see for Saturday. And then as we go into the beginning of next week, that's when it does look like the best rain chances are going to be on the horizon, because we are going to filter back in to that very muggy category. But it looks like, once again, we'll see some fluctuation between the light green and the dark green box as we continue into the beginning of next week. But those plot points kind of in the day 5, 6, and 7 of your 7-day forecasts are typically a bit inaccurate in nature, and we will continue to keep you posted day by day as those do change and we move into the weekend. But for the next 3 days, your short-term forecast, you can just kick your feet up. There's really nothing to worry about weather-wise throughout today, throughout tomorrow, and throughout your Friday. Increasing high temperatures will be the name of the game. 80 degrees today, feeling a little bit warmer tomorrow. And then Friday, feeling a little bit warmer than what we do see tomorrow, somewhere in the upper 80s for high temperatures. But once again, paired up with that drier air, so 84 and 87 are going to feel like the numbers that you do see, as opposed to feeling like the low 90s or maybe even the mid 90s of recent weeks. 53 for a morning low tomorrow. I think after we get through tomorrow morning, that's when we officially kickstart the gradual warming trend. But 53 is definitely going to be on the cooler side of things. I wouldn't even put it past your Eastmans and your Dublins to maybe try to pop up a 49 for tomorrow morning. And then 55 for a morning low once again on Friday. Again, a pretty similar feel to what we did have this morning over the course of the next couple of days. But I do think tomorrow might see some more widespread 50s on that temperature map compared to most areas that did get down to at least 57, 58, or 59 this morning, and a couple areas that went down into the mid 50s. But after we get through that stretch throughout the back half of the work week, morning low of 61 on Saturday, 65 as we roll into Sunday. So getting back closer to where your average low does sit in the mid 60s, but Saturday maybe still a little bit of that cooler feeling. But I think by then we'll kind of be used to that cooler feeling that you're walking out the door to. And it is going to be a little bit warmer, and you might not need anything in the way of a light jacket. And in all honesty, I walked out the door without a light jacket today. So I think many of you are probably just going to say, hey, it's a bit of a pleasant change of pace. Maybe it feels a little bit cooler, but it's not necessarily chilly by any means. We would have to be talking some numbers below the 50-degree mark in the month of June, I think, before it starts to classify as chilly. It's just something that we don't typically see here in Central Georgia. Now, here's a look at your afternoon highs. Each day is going to be at the very most around average, but I do think that each and every day your afternoon high temperatures are going to hover just a couple degrees below average, but today and tomorrow more substantially below average compared to what we do see Friday, Saturday into Sunday. And speaking of Friday, Saturday into Sunday, here's a look at Saturday at 5 p.m. Remember what I was talking about? Maybe some form of a low pressure center tries to form along that stalled boundary down in the Gulf, and all that moisture could try to surge upshore onto areas like Louisiana, Mississippi, into coastal Alabama, maybe even as far east as the Florida Panhandle. Well, all that moisture does look like it does try to push back over to the east as we go into Sunday. Not a definitive rain chance. It actually looked a lot more widespread according to both of these models, the GFS and the Euro, earlier this morning, but now it is backtracking. It looks like we're going to be right on the edge of that cluster of some moisture, producing some fairly widespread showers and maybe even a few pop-up thunderstorms. So that's what I'm going to really try to emphasize in terms of the end of your 7-day forecast. The rain chances will be written in pencil. There's not a lot of agreement amongst these long-range models thus far, and this is something that we're going to continue to keep a close eye on as we get closer, because the closer you get, typically you start to see the models come into better agreement, but it continues to just be a cluster as we go into the beginning of next week. Widespread blue all over Central Georgia, really over most of the state. But the GFS, there's not too many green areas that we do find down here in the southeast. Most of them are back over to the west into Mississippi and into Alabama. So once again, it looks like the chances of rain a little bit better for Monday compared to what we do see Sunday. And it's the same story for your Tuesday. Not a definitive picture of what's actually going to happen. But if we do have more moisture back in the forecast, I would anticipate that in combination with some warmer temperatures will contribute to at least some pop-up shower chances, maybe even a few pop-up storm chances, which is nothing to fret about. It's the summertime. We're used to just about each and every day having the chance at some pop-up showers or maybe even a few rumbles of thunder. Just because you see a thunderstorm icon doesn't mean that's going to correlate to something in the way of severe weather. And we take it all the way out to Wednesday. And how about this? We were talking about how uncharacteristic this backdoor front is and all that drier air ushering into the forecast is. Could we be seeing signs of yet another one about a week out from today? It does appear that the cloud cover kind of pushes down to the south and the southwest, and it looks like there's not too much in the way of rain chances up here to the east and the northeast of us. So we'll continue to be on the lookout for that. Right now, I'm not seeing any definitive signs of another backdoor frontal boundary, say, ushering in some low humidity into the forecast once again. So we'll continue to keep you updated. But it does look like maybe it'll at least push the rain chances out after we go through a stretch of a couple of days where the rain chances, again, are going to be pretty uncertain. They are written in pencil as of right now, but this is something you'll want to continue to stay updated on as we go throughout the weekend, more so as we get closer to Sunday, because Sunday I think we reintroduce the rain chances, but Monday probably the best likelihood of seeing rain. Along with that going to be Tuesday as well. High temperatures looks like they take a little bit of a dip in light of the increased cloud cover and increased rain chances. So maybe not necessarily hovering near that average, which is more than likely going to be 90 degrees by the time we roll into this time frame at the beginning of next week. Until then, it's cruise control weather. Again, grab the light jacket if you really feel like you need it Thursday and Friday mornings. But overall, it's going to kind of be that pleasant chill environment that you are walking out the door to, so you may not necessarily need a light jacket. And that period of time where your morning lows are going to be around, it's only going to be a couple of hours. And if you don't wake up, maybe say before the 7 a.m. hour, this is not going to pertain to you whatsoever. We're really going to hit those morning low values right there around 6:30 to 7 a.m. and maybe closer to 8 o'clock. We're already starting to see signs of that warming trend. So I do believe that we'll creep into the 60s closer to around 8 or 9 when many of you are probably heading out the door for that morning commute. And then we see the temperatures peak on Saturday. Overall, pretty quiet weather stretch. The main thing you need to know is rain chances are back as more humidity creeps back into the forecast towards the beginning of next week. So tropics outlook, no activity expected over the next 7 days. I know this outlook says 8 a.m. on Tuesday, but I just forgot to change the date on it. This is the same update that we did get as of 8 a.m. this morning, and it's mainly attributed to all of the Saharan dust that we see down here in the eastern Atlantic. But typically June is not a very active month as far as the tropic season does go. Take a look at this frequency graphic that I've continued to show over previous days. The peak intensity of hurricane season is going to happen on September 10th. That means that is going to be the peak of when we typically see the frequency of not only just hurricanes, but also tropical storms beginning to form out in the Atlantic basin. We still have a ways to go before we get there. We have to go all the way back over here. There's somewhere in between these two lines right here, May 10th and June 20th. Hurricane season officially started as of Monday on June 1st, and we don't see the frequency of activity really ramp up until we kind of get more so into the month of August, maybe late July at the very, very earliest. But not to say that activity is completely impossible to develop for the month of June and the early portion of the month of July. And we still have about 140 or some odd days until hurricane season officially ends. So you will be seeing one of these tropics updates each and every extended forecast until we get to the end of the season on November 30th. So a couple of notes, I did already kind of allude to a couple of them. Not impossible to see activity in the month of June, but historically, there just isn't much going on in the Atlantic basin, and that's mainly attributed to those sea surface temperatures. We're just now creeping into the summertime season when you are going to have more direct sunlight and kind of the angle of the axis of the Earth is going to be tilted back a little bit more so towards the sun. So that means that we're kind of getting into that time of year where we are going to be a little bit closer to the sun, but it's still going to take some time in order for that solar radiation to heat up the sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic basin, the Caribbean, and of course, getting into the Gulf. The most notable June storm we have seen in recent memory, it actually didn't happen too long ago, Hurricane Beryl, which did form on June 28th. So again, today's date, June 3rd. June 28th is when one of the strongest and one of the earliest June storms did form in recent memory. June 28, 2024, and it reached that peak intensity actually after going into the month of July. July 2nd, it did reach a peak intensity of Category 5 strength. Yes, Hurricane Beryl was one of the strongest storms to form early on in hurricane season. In fact, it goes hand in hand with another storm back in, I believe it was the 2005 season, which is a notoriously famous season that we did see hurricane season wise, but that is where we did actually see another hurricane that did reach very intense strength, somewhere around Category 5 or Category 4 strength. But Hurricane Beryl did do that, and it did make landfall on the island of Grenada down in the southeast Caribbean. It moved all the way across the Caribbean Sea, impacted the Yucatan Peninsula, and continued a northward turn. Made landfall pretty close to Houston, Texas, resulted in a lot of really strong storms, and of course some pretty intense flooding there over on the coast of Texas. But it actually tracked all the way up towards Maine from Texas. So that is a very long track. And of course, it didn't maintain hurricane status that entire time, but all the moisture associated with Beryl was enough to form our fair share of tornado warnings. In fact, tornado warnings stretched from Texas all the way up into the state of Maine, courtesy of Hurricane Beryl. So it did have its fair share of some pretty strong impacts. And again, it was a bit unprecedented to see a storm that intense in nature that early on in hurricane season. So we didn't obviously see anything like that over the course of last year's hurricane season. But I do also want to hone in on the fact that most of the tropics activity that we will see in this early portion of hurricane season, it's going to form near the Gulf or the Atlantic coast of the United States. Remember that low pressure center I was talking about that could develop along that stalled boundary in the middle of the Gulf? That is what we are going to very likely be talking about. We'll try to see some things begin to get its act together in light of the warmer sea surface temperatures and maybe an environment that doesn't have a whole lot of shear, because right now it's kind of the window before the El Nino does look to officially develop. The farther into the summer we go and transitioning into early fall, that of course is going to mark a time frame of when El Nino is going to be out in full force, and it's going to really enhance that activity in the Pacific. But in turn, it is forecasted to hopefully lead to a below average year for us, which is forecasted by Colorado State and NOAA. 13 named storms, maybe 14 at the max end of the range of NOAA. But again, just because we are forecasting a mainly below average year in terms of how many storms, how many hurricanes, or maybe how many major hurricanes, this does not mean that, of course, it is going to be a non-active hurricane season. All it is going to take is for one of those strong storms, maybe even just a Category 2 or a Category 3, to make landfall somewhere in the United States, and it could result in some pretty devastating impacts. So we have to be on the lookout and keep our guard up for each and every one of these storms. And going off of that, remember the upper end of the range, 14, maybe around 13 named storms. Well, each of these columns is going to have 7 names, so it does look like we're going to maybe at the max end of things make our way to Marco or Nana. I believe Nana is how you pronounce that, the N named storm, which is going to be the 14th named storm of the 2026 season if we do make it all the way there. But again, the range, it goes as early or it goes down into the lower end, somewhere around 8. So maybe somewhere around Hannah, Isaias, Josephine, somewhere in the second column is where we look to kind of put a halt to the end or the end of the list of hurricane names that we do see during this tropic season. And of course, we are going to kick it off with Arthur if anything does try to get spinning over the course of the next few days. But again, nothing outlined by the National Hurricane Service over the course of the next 7 days. We'll continue to keep our eyes down in the Gulf, but until then, there's nothing to worry about. If you are curious about it, you can continue to stay updated, and I'll provide updates each and every time we come on for this extended forecast.